to the Everlasting Man Online Book Club. I am so happy today to have Nancy Brown, the author of The Woman Who Was Chesterton, here with me today to celebrate the anniversary of G.K. and Frances Chesterton's marriage and Frances Chesterton's birthday. So this is an amazing bonus episode. I'm super excited to have you here, Nancy. And since we have just the two of us, I thought we might take a little extra time. And I'd love for you to tell me about your relationship with the Chestertons, what got you interested in researching Frances Chesterton, which led to your amazing book, the definitive biography so far of the woman who was Chesterton. I absolutely love this book, and it helped me understand more their marriage and understand more the woman who was behind Chesterton and the woman who in her own right was a beautiful poet and a lovely woman who brought a lot of beauty into the world. So let me know a little bit more about that.
Sure. Thanks, Susan. It's such a pleasure to be here with you tonight. So my journey with Frances started when I was introduced to G.K. Chesterton. I initially read, well, as a lot of people know, I read Orthodoxy first, and I did not like it, let's just say. But about 20 years after my first reading of Orthodoxy, I actually picked it up again. And this time when I read it, I loved it. And I thought, this guy must be a priest. I didn't know anything about Chesterton, not a single thing. All I knew was the name, G.K. Chesterton. So after I read that book, Orthodoxy, and my mind was blown, and I was like, boy, I don't know why I didn't like it the first time, but this time it's amazing. And I picked up a very new biography of G.K. Chesterton. It had just come out recently, and it was by Joseph Pearce. I didn't know who Joseph Pearce was either, but this book was called Wisdom and Innocence, A Life of G.K. Chesterton, I think is the title. And I remember starting to read it, and I got to this chapter called The Chester Blog. And I didn't know what the only thing I related with the blog was writing blogs.
Of course.
But it turned out that chapter was about his wife, because her name was Frances Blogg before she was married. And I was just shocked. I was like, oh, he not only wasn't a priest, he was a married man. And then I was like, oh, did they have kids? But then also in reading that biography, I kind of was reading this description of Chesterton and thinking, he's kind of like my husband. You know, my husband is an artist type and a little bit absent-minded as far as like everyday things, and always, you know, creatively cogitating on ideas and that kind of thing. He related. Anyway, I just related to the whole thing, and I thought, okay, who is Frances, and how did she handle a creative kind of genius husband like that? And what could I learn from her? Because sometimes it's a struggle to be the spouse of someone who's like that. And being a practical person myself, I thought, well, maybe Frances was practical, or maybe she was, you know, how did she handle it? So I really dug into that chapter. And then I was like, no, this didn't tell me anything about her, really. So then I just had to keep exploring. And at some point I had explored enough where I had put together enough that I could give a talk on Frances, which I did very, very long ago in the Chesterton Society. And when I was searching for a title for my talk, Dale and I were kind of going back and forth, and he said, well, what about The Woman Who Was Chesterton? And I thought, oh, it's kind of a take on The Man Who Was Thursday, you know, that sort of thing. And but when we put that title up as the title of my talk, apparently there were some people in the room who thought I was going to talk about the feminine side of G.K. Chesterton. So they were very surprised when I talked about Frances. So that was the beginning of my research on Frances. And then after there was so much interest after I gave that talk, I thought, well, I've just got to find out as much as I can about her. And I just kept researching until I had enough material where I thought, now I can write her story and I can put it in a book. And that's kind of how that all came about.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for doing it because it's a great book and it really helps to flesh out who Chesterton was. And it's really helped me to get a fuller picture of the man. And
Yeah.
of course, then get acquainted with Frances, who is an accomplished woman in her own right. So, for the reading assignment for this, if you didn't read it, please don't worry. But I did want to at least introduce people to Chesterton's marriage proposal because it was so beautiful. And we have it on our blog and it's linked back at the reading assignment. So if you don't have it right away, yep, you can print it right off of our website. It's called Chesterton's marriage proposal. And, it's just lovely, so romantic. So romantic. And, he begins with a description of their future home. And I know all of these things were somewhere inside of my husband, I'm sure, but he didn't articulate them quite as well as GK did. So I don't know if there's some favorite parts that you have in there. The one that really stood out to me, I just think would be hilarious is where he mentions that we might write, "Our God is a consuming fire over the kitchen grate," to assist the mystic musings of the cook. I think that's beautiful. And I think it's also remarkable that the cook isn't necessarily, Francis, and it might be Gilbert. And I think that he saw their home as a place of a lot of freedom.
Yes, yes. Well, first, before we get into that, and
Yes.
I love that part.
Okay.
This is Chesterton's written marriage proposal, but he did propose in person
Okay.
on the St. James Bridge in London, right in the middle of the bridge. And I stood there with my husband, Mike, and we said to each other, "This is where it happened."
Oh.
So that was cool. But he did write this down. But I believe that his actual proposal was in person, just, a private moment with Frances.
Of course.
So yes, and he does say in here that she will have to do the shopping. He doesn't explain his lack of monetary intelligence,
right,
shall we say? But we know he did have trouble with that.
Right. It became evident throughout his life that might not be his forte.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. So in this letter also is a description of how he first came to meet Frances, which I would like to read. This is great. One pleasant Saturday afternoon, his friend Lucian Oldershaw, who actually became his brother-in-law because he married Frances's sister Ethel. Lucian said to him, "I'm going to take you to see the blogs." "The what?" said the unhappy man. "The blogs," said the other darkly. Naturally assuming that it was the name of a public house, he reluctantly followed his friend. He came to a small front garden. I'm going to take liberties with this and skip a little bit.
Sure.
They raised the latch. They rang the bell. No flowers in the pot winked. No brick grinned. Now that just reminded me of Dickens, right? The doorbell in the Christmas Carol. No sign in heaven or earth warned him. The birds sang on in the trees. He went in. The first time he spent an evening at the blogs, there was no one there. And what could he mean by that? He means that Frances wasn't there.
Right.
That is to say, and then he describes the other blogs that were there. But the second time he went there, he was plumped down on a sofa beside a being of whom he had a vague impression that brown hair grew at intervals all down her like a caterpillar. Once in the course of conversation, she looked straight at him, and he said to himself, as plainly as if he had read it in a book, "If I had anything to do with this girl, I should go on my knees to her. If I spoke with her, she would never deceive me. If I depended on her, she would never deny me. If I loved her, she would never play with me. If I trusted her, she would never go back on me. If I remembered her, she would never forget me. I may never see her again. Goodbye." It was all said in a flash, but it was all said. I just love that section. That's so romantic.
Totally romantic. I mean, you can see why he swept her off her feet.
Yes.
It's amazing. I want to go back just to the beginning, just to the first paragraph, because, his humor is what gets me. And I love this idea of she gets a sofa and he sits on the floor. I mean, I think that's great. Like I prefer the floor. And then the idea, we shall each retain a suit of evening dress for great occasions, and at other times clothe ourselves in the skins of wild beasts. How pretty you would look, which would fit your taste in furs and be economical. Like, I know she had to have an amazing sense of humor, and she had to love to laugh with him because and that's such a great foundation for a marriage, is a great sense of humor, because you're going to go through all sorts of difficulties, as the Chestertons did, as all of us do, and if you can't laugh, it's going to be a really tough life. And so I love that from the very beginning he's making these whimsical little asides, and maybe pointing out that I think there's the subtext of that is, I know you might want some finer things, and maybe we'll figure out how to do it another way, because I don't anticipate being very wealthy,
Right.
And that's great, and
Right.
she saw that and she accepted that, and she decided to join right in, which is just a beautiful thing.
Right. And going along that humor thing, there have been many happily married couples who, when you say, maybe you say it to the wife, what did you like about him? And she'll say, he made me laugh, right?
Yes.
It's one of those things that really holds you together. And I think one of the keys of Gilbert and Frances was their poetry. So they would write poems actually back and forth to each other, and many of them are quite humorous. And I also kind of think that they solved their little spats that way too. Like if something was bothering either one of them, they would write a poem to the other person, and then the other person would respond back. And we have some of those poems, so that they actually did that. Some of the poems are lost; we don't have them, but the ones we do have, and there's even, I was listening to How Far Is It to Bethlehem today, which is Frances's, like, I don't know, her magnum opus. Her
It's so beautiful. It's a beautiful Christmas carol, and I'm so glad our parish plays it. And I'm
that's
so
wonderful.
grateful. It's just delightful.
But at one point, Chesterton actually parodied, and he wrote a poem about how it's not far to Bethlehem. I mean, he just parodied her whole poem, and it's funny. And so they had that kind of relationship, and I think that's really cool, because the more communication outlets you have for each other as a couple, I think the better your communication is.
Absolutely.
So can we skip to the very last paragraph now?
Oh, sure. Yes, absolutely. Oh, the last paragraph. Oh my goodness. I mean, this is just absolutely amazing. So, do you want to read it, or do you want me to read it?
You read it, because then I'll make.
Then you comment on it.
Yeah.
But there are 4 lamps of thanksgiving always before him. The first is for his creation out of the same earth with such a woman as you. The second, that he has not, with all his faults, gone after strange women. You cannot think how a man's self-restraint is rewarded in this. The third is that he has tried to love everything alive, a dim preparation for loving you. And the fourth is, but no words can express that. Here ends my previous existence. Take it. It led me to you.
Yeah, that's
Wow,
kind of,
Gilbert.
kind of beautiful right there.
It's amazing. I cannot. Yes. So,
well, first of all,
yes.
the line that really strikes me is that line, I have tried to love everything. And I just really, really briefly want to let people know that I just published this new book. It's called Chesterton's Character. And one of the things I discuss is that very line, the one about loving everything, because I think that really describes Chesterton. And if that's your underlying philosophy in life, that you want to try to love everything, that's an incredible philosophy. But I was just reading my favorite book this week, which is my favorite childhood book, I should say.
Okay.
Rereading Harriet the Spy, which is one of my favorite childhood books. And in Harriet the Spy, her nanny, she has a nanny in the beginning of the book whose name is Old Golly. Old Golly actually quotes Dostoevsky. And the quote is from the Brothers Karamazov. And this is the quote, which we know Chesterton read. Okay? Love all God's creation, the whole and every grain of sand in it. Love every leaf, every ray of God's light.
Mm.
Love the animals, love the plants, love everything. If you love each thing, you will perceive the mystery of God in all. And when once you perceive this, you will begin to comprehend it better every day, until you come at last to love the whole world with a love that will be an all-embracing and universal love. I thought,
Oh,
ooh, that's
wow.
kind of a good connection there.
Absolutely a good
Yeah,
connection. That's amazing.
yeah.
Oh, I love
So,
that. I love that. And I love this. I mean, I love his thoughts on chastity that, he's been rewarded for this waiting for his beautiful bride. I just think that's a lovely sentiment that, and he
mhm,
puts it delicately, but I mean, there's a real authentic truth behind what he's saying. I love that.
mhm,
And creation out of the same earth as such a woman as you, this sort of unity and also equality. This
right.
they are partners in this marriage. This is, they're made of the same earth, and I just think that's lovely. Oh, I wanted to I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, but Exiv guy, but the this did remind me of that too. So I wanted to say absolutely. The poems to each other reminds me of daily dialogue that the Worldwide Marriage Encounter teaches. And I was thinking that too. My husband is an actuary, so he has a mathematical mind and he's not the most emotive. I will say that. But some of the tools that the dialogues gave, like describe your emotion like it's anthropomorphized, like sitting on a shelf or, looking over a cliff or those types of things. And he could get really creative within the structure of the exercises that they asked you to do to try to describe the emotions. And so his letters to me were always the most emotive. I thought it was a really good tool, a little bit artificial, and it certainly didn't end up something that I might want published in a book one day, but it was really a great way to get down to the bottom of things for a while. But it was funny, like right when we first started doing dialoguing, we went to our weekend and we're real excited. So we start dialoguing. Oh, excessive guy. Thank you. So we started dialoguing and we went to the first meeting where we were supposed to meet all the older people that were our mentors. And he says, well, how are things going? My husband's like, they're terrible. And he says, well, what happened? He's like, well, we did the dialogue and it just went bad. And he's like, you didn't talk about the mother-in-law, did you? He's like, yes. He's like, no, you don't talk about the mother-in-law. Not right away. That's way down the road. And so once we stopped that, it went much better after that. So I don't know. Chesterton had his own issues with in-laws, right? You talk about that in chapter 3 about the wedding day. So maybe we'll go from the end to the beginning. But I wanted to talk about in-laws because it's a nice segue. Ada
Sure.
was difficult. I know there were some challenges with the families. So
Right.
even before they got married, there was a little bit of tension. Can you describe that a little bit and
Well,
let her?
I don't think it's anything excessive. And I think a lot of couples experience the same thing where maybe your mother doesn't think he's good enough for you. And so apparently Chesterton's mother didn't think she was quite the right person because she thought she was too arty.
Hmm.
And she was living in Bedford Park. Not that you can help it. You're living where your parents, kind of left you there, where your parents are living. But Bedford Park was known as a very bohemian neighborhood, which was a little bit arty, a little bit communist, a little bit socialist, a little bit Marxist. There was all a kind of a liberal mix there, in the newer sense of the word liberal. Um, so yeah, so Mrs. Blogg thought Chesterton was never going to make a living. He
Hmm.
didn't look like a real great candidate for a spouse. So both of their mothers were having a little problem with both of them. And that's one of the reasons why their engagement was so long. So we didn't even talk about that. They met in 1896.
Okay.
They got engaged in 1898. So that bridge over St. James, that was in 1898. But they didn't get married until 1901. So in a 5-year relationship, when Frances is going from 27 to 32, they didn't get married until her 32nd birthday. Gilbert was actually 5 years younger than her. So they met when he was 22
Wow.
and got married when he was 27. So Why did it take so long? One of the reasons why it took so long was because Gilbert wasn't making a good living and he couldn't support her, and he needed to prove to her mother that he was going to be able to support her. And they were, I mean, if they would have had Excel spreadsheets, he would have been filling in the little squares because he was writing down, I'm going to get this much from that article, and I'm going to get this much from writing that column, and I'm going to get this much from reviewing that book. And he was trying to get those numbers high enough to prove that he could support both of them in their marriage and eventually a family, which is what he was hoping, and she was hoping as well. So yeah, I think the tension was kind of a normal, tension that in-laws have towards, but eventually I can also say they all came to love each other. I mean, Frances absolutely loved Gilbert's father. So Gilbert's father was Edward Chesterton, and he had already retired, and he was he had all kinds of hobbies that he liked to do. And one of them was that he wrote a book, and he illustrated it absolutely beautiful. I have a copy of it from Aidan Mackey. It's about 7 daughters who lived in a house, and it's amazing. And Frances actually had used her influence to get Edward Chesterton, GK's father's book, published. So they worked together on that. And then eventually Edward and Frances worked together to get GK's first book published. So there was a little conniving going on between Frances and her father-in-law. They seemed to really get along. So yeah, I mean, and then Marie Louise, who is GK's mother. I think most people were a little bit afraid of her. She apparently was a very strong woman, was very opinionated, not afraid to say it. Not a lot of, hey, how are you doing today? She would just jump right into the conversation, that sort of thing. But she and Ada got along really well. So this is Cecil Chesterton's wife.
Yes.
And Ada was also a little abrasive herself. So maybe these two women really got along, but that was not Frances's personality. So that kept her a little bit well, I'm not like that. So
right.
So that's a little bit of the tangle of relationships.
Cecil was GK's brother.
That's correct. Yes.
Yes.
So, younger brother. Yeah.
Right. And there was just the two of them, right? There was a child who was lost. Young.
So Beatrice was the firstborn.
Okay.
And she, I believe, was about 4 years old when G.K. Chesterton was born.
Yes.
And she died when she was 7. So he has vague memories of her, but he doesn't talk about her at all because his father wouldn't talk about her at all. Oh. So Edward's heart was broken when she died, and it from the record, she died of typhoid fever.
Yes.
And she was their darling. She was the apple of their eye. And she, of course, the firstborn girl, and she was doted on, and she sounds like she was, just this adorable, intelligent little girl who died when she was 7, and it broke their hearts. So that was an early tragedy. So then Chesterton now becomes the oldest.
Yes.
And then about 3 years after he was born, his brother Cecil was born. So, and then they become very close because the two brothers become very close.
Yes.
So, yeah.
So marked with loss in the early life. But at the beginning of the chapter, we got to go back to the beginning and talk about the wedding day.
Yes.
So
yes.
We're talking about chapter 3 again,
Yep.
And the woman who was Chesterton, starts off talking about the marriage. So
the wedding, yeah.
Yes. So you want to describe the day? I know that you said Yates was there.
Oh yes, yes. These are all people who lived in Frances's neighborhood.
Okay.
So so they just had all those neighbors actually. Yeah, the Yates, they were so. Chesterton had a debate club when he was young, and the blogs started completely independently because she didn't even know Chesterton yet. They started a debate club. It was kind of a popular thing to do back then, but they started one in their Bedford neighborhood, and the Yates would come to it. And that's how they got to be friends with the Yates family. But they got married on June 28th, 1901, which was actually a Friday, just like it is today.
That's wonderful.
Pretty cool.
Yes.
And it was at the same time Francis Chesterton's 32nd birthday. So I don't know if they decided to do that so they'd never forget what the anniversary is or why that exactly happened. But
I think it's got to be to make things easy on Gilbert.
that was my thought as well. So they got married in the parish church, which was an Anglican church where Frances was a regular, and Gilbert had started to come with her. They're very kind of socialist, Christian socialist guy. This father, Conrad Noel, was presiding at their wedding. He was a friend of theirs at this point in time. So the funny things that happened on the wedding day were Gilbert forgot his tie. So somebody had to run out and buy him a tie. And then apparently when he knelt down in front of church, the price tag was still showing on the bottom of his shoe. So there was some laughter. Oh, and I did want to also mention that although everyone has always told me there are no pictures, absolutely no pictures of their wedding day, I have become convinced that we do indeed have pictures of their wedding day. And these pictures that we've seen already. So I'm going to show you these.
Okay.
So here's one of them.
Yes.
And here's the other one. And you notice something interesting about these two pictures, which is it's the same day.
Yes.
They're dressed in the same clothes.
Uh-huh.
That we have no other pictures of them like this.
I see.
Every other picture that we have one picture of them. That's it. This one, we have two of the same day. And she has this beautiful dress on.
Right.
Here, he has this very kind of old outfit on with this little tie here. And I'm thinking, oh, that's the tie somebody bought for him.
Looks kind of new.
I think this is their wedding day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, it would make a lot of sense. They're young.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
They look beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I think.
Okay.
So anyway, so now they've just gotten married. They had a little reception and they're going to go off on their honeymoon. Lucian Oldershaw, their future brother-in-law. So he is Chesterton's best man or one of his groom. As far as I know, he probably just had two, his brother and Lucian. Okay. So Lucian gets their suitcases. He's in charge of taking them to the train station. Gilbert and Frances are supposed to also go to the train station. And then all their luggage and them are supposed to go on to where they're having their honeymoon. But Gilbert, as they're walking to the train station, he has to make a couple of pit stops. And the first one he makes is he has to drink a glass of milk at the shop where his mother would always take him to have a glass of milk.
Oh, my goodness.
Now, this makes me laugh because I just think of Frances going, okay, we have to be reminded of your mother here, but that's okay. So then the next stop, they have to stop at another store, and Gilbert has to buy a revolver because he wants to be able to defend his wife.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, these stops, by the time they get to the train station, their train has left the station. And that was the express train. And now they are getting on the slow train. And they get on the slow train and they can't make it all the way to where they were going to go to the Norfolk Broads is where they were aiming for, but they didn't make it that far. They stopped at a city, and I can't remember the name of the city, but the place was called the White Horse Inn. And of course, the White Horse is very significant to the Chestertons, so it's a great place to stop. However, that's not the end of the story, because Frances says she's exhausted, and Gilbert says, why don't you rest, and I'm going to go for a walk. Now, that also doesn't seem like normal wedding behavior. He goes off for a walk, and then he gets lost.
Oh, my God.
Because he's Gilbert.
Right.
So it takes quite a while before the young lovers are reunited. But that is the start of their married life. They did go on to have a very happy honeymoon of 6 days in the Norfolk Broads where they honeymooned. And then they came back to normal life and started their wedded life together. They took an apartment. It seems like one of the people that Frances used to work for gave them an apartment to stay in for a few months.
Wow.
So that was the beginning of their of their and it's funny you look at that and you go, well, that was indicative of their life. You would, if you were Francis, you would never know what was going to happen next with Gilbert.
Right. Well, Gilbert probably didn't know what was going to happen next with Gilbert.
Maybe not.
I think some of this just seems to happen serendipitously.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
But definitely an adventure, and I think it's great too. They started off with difficulty, and that seems to be not a bad way to start off a marriage, because marriage is our path to heaven, and Chesterton talks about that a lot. I love his thought of I love the thought of marriage being a duel to the death. I love the thought, and I wonder how the women in his life influenced that. His strong mother, his wife, who had a lot of talents, and all of these women in his life shaping his views on women.
Right.
I think it's really remarkable, the women he had around him. So I'm super grateful for the research you've done into Frances to help give us a fuller picture.
She definitely was not afraid to say her opinions. It's interesting because one of the things Gilbert says about Frances is that she was a skilled and practiced debater. Mm-hmm. And I also think that maybe that was another way where they worked out their differences, by let's have a debate, because they both did know how to debate and present their ideas and also present the opposition.
Absolutely.
So you have to understand the opposition in order to have that debate. So I just think that's very interesting. But then also, she has all these skills of hospitality. And I think that's one of the things that we did want to talk about is that the idea of the open door. So they kept their house open. They had a spare room. People were always staying there. But besides all that, they were always having people over. There were parties, and they used to call them at homes, where you would open up your house on a Sunday afternoon and whoever wanted to come by would come by. But Frances also kept a diary for a couple of years, very early in their marriage, let's say around 1902 to 3. And Gilbert encouraged her to keep this diary, but it wasn't really a diary. It was more like a who came over for dinner and where did we go for dinner.
Okay.
And boy, you start looking up these people, and I can't even tell you the names because they're not names that we would know now. But when you look up the names, each one of those people has a Wikipedia page. It's a
wow.
Somebody in politics. It's a writer. It's a journalist. They're all the well-known people of the day, and the Chestertons are mingling with all these people, invited to dinner and having them over. And yeah, I mean, it didn't take long for Chesterton to go from nobody knows who he is,
right,
and to all of a sudden he's this star journalist.
Right. Well, I think people saw the talent, and I noticed that too when we were talking, when we were reading the marriage proposal. I love the idea of hospitality, of course, but he refers to it humorously as that. He says, "I shall offer no objection to your having an occasional dragon to dinner, or a penitent griffin to sleep in the spare bed." I just think that's so cute. And then the idea, he says later on, he says, "Oh, dearest, dearest Frances, let us always be very gentle to older people." I love that. I love that he's got their marriage, he sees as a vehicle for spreading beauty and good and charity and hospitality in the world. And I just absolutely love that, that he wants to, I mean, despite possibly some difficulties with his in-laws, he's saying, let's welcome them in. Whoever needs a place, let's make our home a welcoming place. And I just think that's such a beautiful sentiment and one of the beautiful fruits of marriage. And their marriage was very fruitful.
Yes.
They never had children. I know that you talk about that in your book, that they suffered infertility and sought the help of obstetrician gynecologists and never could quite figure out what was going on. She married at a later age. Right. When fertility was already declining. Right. And, so they were never blessed with natural children. However, they did have a lot of fruitfulness in their marriage. And so one of the ways that we had identified was godchildren.
Right.
I want you to talk a little bit about godchildren, because is it somewhere around 23 that we
I,
know of?
I believe I counted at least 25. And
25.
so imagine keeping track of 25 godchildren. I'm blown away. But I have two, and I love them and I want to be in their lives and everything. But if I had 25, I'd be like, I will love them all. I want to be a part of all of your lives. But what a challenge that would be. But I think if you knew Gilbert and Frances at that time and you had a baby, wouldn't you want them to be your child's
Absolutely.
godparents? Yes, I think so too. So the way they treated children, the way they accepted children, the way they loved children was so attractive. It just must have made other people say, well, gosh, when I have a baby, I want them to be, my baby's godparents as well. So I think what's unique about the Chestertons, and maybe it's not that unique, but because they could not have children, I think they could concentrate on all these other families and all these other people, and just give that love away to as many other young people and they were very interested in helping young people along and trying to be good listeners. And they knew that some of the families of those 25, they were in difficult circumstances. There's a boy who lived with them every school holiday for 10 whole years, Michael Braybrook. And his parents had gotten divorced. The father had abandoned the
Mm.
family, so there's these difficulties. But then, Chesterton can step in and be that, sort of spiritual dad, and Frances can be like the spiritual mom. And you can use those motherly and fatherly skills, even though you don't have those children of your own. And that's something they're such a beautiful example to us of. Yeah.
Well, they really are. And I think that's especially a good example for our age because, the idea of, certainly there are people who never have children of their own,
Right.
but the idea that they might also have some relationship with other people's children and lighten
Right.
the load and be part of that community and that network that surrounds a family to be able to help them. I just think that's such a beautiful idea. And it's something that the more we embrace, the better things will be for young moms, single moms, these divorce situations. I think all of us could look and see where can we be a little bit more hospitable to those around us, or
Right.
to imitate the Chestertons in the way they welcome children they didn't give birth to in their own home, and the toy theaters, the
Right.
plays they put on. I mean, they really just knew how to have a good time and have fun. And I think in a way that it would be difficult if you had a large family. I love the idea of putting on plays, but honestly, at the end of the day, with my brood still at home, I do not have time to set up a stage and costumes and a set and write a script. I think it's wonderful that the Chestertons did, and that they were
Right.
so open and welcoming in their home, particularly around the holidays. So
Hmm.
phenomenal. And Frances was involved also with education. I love this
Hmm.
aspect. I love that she was related in some way to Charlotte Mason. She
Yep.
had a relationship with her. Can you talk a little bit about that, and then what her involvement was with that? And I know Chesterton has written several essays on Charlotte Mason and her methods.
Yes.
So yes,
I would say her educational philosophy. Yes.
right.
So Charlotte Mason had started a group called the Parents National Educational Union, PNEU. And when Frances finished her college years, she was going to she was taking classes to become a teacher. I don't know exactly why, but she didn't become a teacher. She was doing tutoring, so one-on-one. She was teaching Sunday school at church. But then she took this job as the general secretary to the Parents National Educational Union, and her boss was Charlotte Mason. And so she loved the ideas that Charlotte Mason put forth, which was natural learning, kind of like a precursor almost to Montessori, except maybe the Anglican version of
Okay.
that. So natural learning, outdoor classroom as much as possible, natural history, writing, keeping notebooks with drawings in them, poetry in them. So maybe less classroom, less you know, less of a traditional way of learning, and yet, a good way of learning.
Right.
So, and Frances loved all those ideas. Because actually Frances grew up her mother had very liberal educational ideas. Frances was one of the, Frances and her sisters went to the very first kindergarten
Mm,
that was ever started in London. And they had to bring some German ladies over because no one in London knew how to do kindergarten. That was a brand new idea.
sure.
So they actually went there, and they attended a more of a liberal education than most of the other students that were going to school at that time. So Frances had already had her mind kind of opened up to maybe some alternative learning or educational ideas. And then Charlotte Mason, of course, she just they resonated with each other, and they both loved those ideas. Gilbert got involved just because Frances was involved. So Frances would give talks. It's very similar to the Chesterton Society. They had local groups of the
Okay.
PNEU, and someone would go and give talks, and then they would have a meeting. Often Frances was the speaker, and then later on she would get Gilbert to do the speaking. And then and they supported Charlotte Mason's ideas as well. And then Frances, after she got married, she still was teaching CCD. She was still tutoring. And then her sister and Lucian Oldershaw, Ethel and Lucian, had 5 children who went to school near them. Frances became involved in their school. She
Mm,
eventually wrote the school song for them, and she was involved in whenever they would put on a play. She was helping them out. Sometimes she wrote the play, sometimes she would just help with the costumes and that sort of thing. And then eventually in Beaconsfield, Gilbert and Frances started a play group. So they had adults who wanted to put on plays. They got together, they figured out what script they were going to do, made the costumes, and then they would just have community theater. So they were, yeah, I mean, they loved that. They loved the drama and yeah. So
yeah. And hospitality and
yes,
yes, and education. So the marriage, Gilbert was really the public face.
yep.
He was the journalist. He was the famous one. I know that Frances said in 1921 when she came to America that she didn't really realize that he was famous until she came to America because the journalists, in their very American way, were pestering her for quotes and photographs and, talking about what is it like to be married to a famous person. And she's like, we don't have the same culture you do. So this isn't quite the same thing. But she was his support, and she
Yep.
was definitely a necessary part, I think, of his writing career. If it wasn't for Frances, I don't think we would have Gilbert the way that we had Gilbert. I don't know that he would have been organized enough to be able to be successful or to, finish his works or stay employed, perhaps. What are your thoughts on that related
Well,
to your research?
yeah, there's definitely teamwork that happened. Well, before they got married, Gilbert had written some poems, and they weren't going anywhere. He had reviewed a few books that it was going. He would had some unsigned articles that were in the newspaper. He was not famous at all when she met him, and
Hmm.
by the time they got married, only because of her influence. So she had a sister who eventually died, Gertrude. She was in an accident, but Gertrude was engaged to this guy named Rex Brimley Johnson. And he had his own little publishing company. And so Frances had gone to him and said, "Here's a little collection of my fiance's poems.
Mm,
Would you publish them?" And he did. So that it was definitely Frances's influence that got his very first publishing book of poems published. The second book and Frances absolutely loved his poetry.
right.
So I think that she thought, I'm marrying a poet. That's who he's going to be.
Right.
Boy, wasn't she surprised by
Yeah,
how life turned out.
absolutely.
So the same thing happened with his second book of poetry. She was involved in that as well. So without her, would Chesterton have gone into the book publishing business? I don't know. I really don't know. But I think, how the two together are better and stronger than either one of them could be alone. And that's definitely a description of GK and Frances. She helped him so much. She helped him be organized. She helped him get to where he was supposed to be lecturing. She helped. Oh, so there's so many stories about how she helped him get his articles in on time.
Yes.
Shall we have the messenger boy wait? Yes, please have him wait. Should we have the train wait? Yes, please have the train wait. So, yeah, so she really helped him be a little more organized than he was.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I definitely think, I mean, and there's stories about the Ballad of the White Horse where she's the one who wanted him to finish that epic poem. She loved it so much. She said, let's go out and get influenced by being by the White Horse and see where King Alfred was, and took him on field trips basically, and encouraged him to finish that poem because she really loved it and wanted him to do it. And would he have, I mean, it could have been an unfinished poem without her, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I definitely think that she helped him, and I don't know what he would have been like without her. I honestly don't. I can't imagine, him alone. I don't think he would have done well. I really think he needed his mom when he was younger, and he
Yes.
really needed Frances. After they got married, he really needed her.
Well,
I
and
mean, there's a great, beautiful story where Gilbert and Frances are at a party, and Gilbert's talking to this other woman, and all of a sudden he looks up and he says, "Oh my, where's Frances?" And she says, "I'm not sure. Should I go find her?" And Gilbert says, "I'll find her. I need her." And the woman said something like, "Oh, what do you need her for?" And he said, "Oh, this is what he said. I might need her. That's why I have to find her, because I might need her."
okay.
So he always had to know kind of where she was, and he always wanted to see where she was. I mean, he was very dependent on her.
Right.
I think she was probably a little more independent than he was,
Okay.
but still very their lives were so entwined, and so much togetherness. They're just a beautiful example of a couple that just really were always together. They traveled so much together. They were intimately involved in every aspect of his life and his business, quote unquote, his writing.
Absolutely. I mean, I've heard that when they came to America, I think it was the first time she was ill and warned not to come, and she
Yes.
came anyway and almost died.
Right.
Like she was very ill, and but she wouldn't be without him. He
Right.
wasn't going to go across the ocean without her, and and they needed to be together. So I think it's absolutely phenomenal example of Christian marriage and love for one another, and and that marriage grew stronger over the years. They started off pretty secular. In their wedding ceremony, you said in your book that they left out a lot of the religious parts of the ceremony, and then and then throughout time, and I'm sure it was because he was sort of agnostic and she was Anglican, and they didn't want their differences to divide them. Even when he came into the church, he suffered because she wasn't ready yet to come into the Catholic Church. And so there was a separation there. So eventually she did follow him several years later into the church, which is a beautiful thing. And they were grateful to have that together. But that they always wanted to be together, which is just so beautiful. So I wanted to also talk about conversions, and then I want to take some questions from the audience. If anybody has questions, go ahead and ask them. We're going to talk about their role in conversions, because we do believe that their marriage, the sum of the two of them is greater than the parts. They definitely saw a fruitfulness that was not just in the natural order, as in having children, but another way. So.
Right. I mean, we know there are plenty of stories where, for example, the Chestertons, they lived through World War I, which they called the Great War because World War II had not happened yet. They would go and visit soldiers in the hospital who were wounded, and that was just part of their, mission of the corporal works of mercy, right? It was just something they did. And they met this one soldier, and he became their friend. and he and his wife would come over and visit. And after visiting, I don't know how long it took, but they wanted to become Catholic. They wanted to be what Chesterton and Francis were. And so GK and Francis became their sponsors into the Catholic Church. So that's just one example. There's so many examples. Even their secretary. So when Dorothy Collins came as their secretary in 1926, Gilbert had already converted.
Mm-hmm.
That was the year that Francis converted. So imagine, all of the things that you're going through as you're converting and the things you're thinking about. And so here's Dorothy now. She's their secretary and she's Anglican.
Mm-hmm.
And here's Francis going through this whole thing. And why am I becoming Catholic? Well, guess what? Then Dorothy's a convert.
Wow.
So, and Cecil, Gilbert's brother, surprisingly, actually converted first.
Wow.
So yeah, he converted years before that, during the kind of around the time of the Marconi scandal.
Okay.
He had converted to being a Catholic. So yeah, there's interesting, all of these connections back then. And then there's that beautiful story. What's the name of the priest? Is it Father Knox?
Monsignor Knox. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Ronald Knox.
Yes, Ronald Knox. So he is reading Chesterton.
Yes.
Before Chesterton's Catholic.
He read Orthodoxy.
Yes, and that made him convert to becoming a Catholic.
Yes.
And then when Chesterton is converting, he's looking for help from Father Knox.
Yes, and Father Knox
is just this paradoxical.
It's a game of spiritual leapfrog.
Right.
It was so beautiful. They brought each other into the church,
right,
in an amazing way, and then that's continued. I mean, Dale has a little notebook of conversions, and Chesterton and Francis have interceded for people, even after their earthly life, and people are continuing through Chesterton's writing, through Francis's beautiful hymns and poems, to find Christ and to find his church. So this is not something that ended at the end of their lives.
Right.
For sure. So,
right. Well, even in the 1940s, Ada Chesterton, who you would not necessarily think would ever convert, she did.
Yeah.
So after her husband died, after Gilbert died, after Francis died, it could have been the influence of heaven, in her life. So yeah, she converted too.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. And that reminds us too, some of the most difficult relationships can be the relationships we have in our own families, and to never give up and to always, your charity in those relationships can pay off in the long run. So it's really important to follow the Chesterton's examples and all of that. So I promised we'd look at some questions. Okay. I've got Kat from St. Louis says, is there much of their writing directly... it disappeared. I'm sorry. I'm trying to ask if GK and Francis have any writings between them during their individual conversions that details any difficult conversations they had.
Well, they weren't writing letters to each other at the time because they were married and living in the same house. Poems not about their conversion that I can think of. What difficulties they did have, I have outlined in my book, The Woman Who Was Chesterton. But in a very brief summary, we can say Gilbert had a very Catholic view of his faith, starting even in 1908 when Orthodoxy was published. But he did not convert until 1922, and we believe that the reason why is because he really wanted Francis to convert with him. He wanted to do everything together with her, and she just wasn't ready. She hadn't gone through the same mental exercises that he had gone through, even though they did talk about all of it. There was a little bit where Francis wrote a letter one time and said, I don't want to, if I convert at the same moment that Gilbert converts, people will think I'm doing it for him. And I don't want anyone to think that. If I'm going to convert, which is what she said at the time, because she didn't know if she would or not, if I'm going to convert, I want it to be on my own terms.
Absolutely.
So that was the reason why. And it did take her 4 more years. However, I did find a letter that she wrote 6 months after Gilbert converted saying, I know which way I'm going to go. So she already knew, I think, within 6 months, and she just needed to talk. She talked to Father O'Connor a lot.
Okay.
He was their Catholic priest friend. So she had many sessions with him leading up to her eventual conversion.
Wow. Well, and her thoughtful approach, I mean, I think that's important to be deliberate, and it shows what great importance she placed on the conversion. So that's
That's so true.
a testament to her deep faith, love for
Right.
God, and for the truth, which is
Yes.
evident in Gilbert's writings as well. But that's a painful thing. I think they went through a lot of challenges in their marriage, and they're a good example of remaining faithful in spite of
Yes.
difficulties. So, all right, I've got another question here from Bob. How often did GKC refer directly to Francis in any of his public writing?
I can easily answer that. Not often. But
Mm-hmm.
that Frances was a we always say she was a shy Victorian lady. She was shy, and she was an introvert. She asked GK not to write about her in his autobiography, but he could hardly keep her out of it because she's such an important part of his life. He didn't talk about her life at all, which is why I had to dig so hard to find out. There's little clues, but you have to dig. So he doesn't really mention her too often, but there are little clues. Like if he talks about a husband and a wife, you can imagine that maybe he got his information from living with Francis. And so he has some comments like that, but he's very general when he talks about marriage, and so not really specifically mentioning, back then they didn't write like we would write now. We would write, much more openly about our relationships, but so.
Yeah, very good. Well, and I think though we can intuit, I mean, and we do, from what he writes about what joy there might have been in their relationship, or there might be wonder and these types of things. So yes. I imagine a happy home. I imagine a creative home. Yes. I imagine a home sometimes where dinner was had on the carpet in the living room, and
or on the rooftop,
and that there was a bit of a carefree. There weren't a lot of rules that didn't matter, right. The rules that were, it's like keep the commandments and break the conventions and keep the commandments, that type of idea, that we would never be immoral, but that we might have more freedom with things that didn't necessarily matter. Right. I don't know, however, if they ever wore animal skins.
No, but
yes.
we do have a few pictures with Frances where she's got a fur collar on.
Yes.
Those were the fashions of the time, to wear a fur collar.
Absolutely. So, my son actually inherited from one of his ancestors on my father's side a fox stole. Oh. So it's like foxes biting each other's tails in a series. And so he thought it was the coolest thing ever. So he wears it like it's some sort of caveman garb, which was not its original intention. It was a fine evening wear. So
right.
Yes, that was the style back in the day. Gary got an error. Keep trying to look for that book. I don't know if this QR code will work, but if you look up The Woman Who Was Chesterton, or you look up Nancy Brown on our website, chesterton.org, if you're a member, you're going to get an even better price on that, because we get 20% off all of books. So I can't recommend this book more strongly if you're really interested in learning more about Chesterton and his relationship with Francis, which I think was really pivotal and underlined all of his work. And I think the better we understand that, the better we understand who he is. So we are about out of time. I think I've answered most of the questions. We've gotten to most of the questions in the chat. If you have any more questions, you can feel free to email us at podcast@chesterton.org. If there's something specifically for Nancy, I promise I will make sure to forward it on. I speak with her regularly. She is a good friend of mine. I want to mention that we do have the week off for Independence Day And then we are going to have a special guest on July 10th. The Pints with Chesterton gals are going to be with us. They are amazing. We've got Marie Bates and Grace Krause. We are going to be discussing Chapter 7, The War of the Gods and the Demons. Well, the War of the Gods and Demons. And that is going to be amazing. Again, you can order Nancy Brown's book on our website, The Woman Who Was Chesterton. Invite your friends to join us. It's never too late. We've got a playlist which has all of these episodes on it. You can go back and listen to them. It's not too late to register for the conference, but you better hurry up because the hotel rooms are selling out. Nancy and I are going to be there. We're going to be giving a talk on, we just came up with the title today. It was Fruitful Friendship, the Chesterton Scriptural Rosary. We are going to talk about this is something we're giving away free to everybody who comes to the conference. It's the inaugural edition of the Rosary booklet, exclusive just for our conferences this year. It has meditations from Chesterton, both Gilbert and Francis's writings on each of the 20 mysteries of the Holy Rosary. It has sacred scripture related to each of those, and it has a meditation composed by the Chester Chicks, which is a group of women who meet regularly to discuss Chesterton, which was founded by Nancy Brown. And so that's part of our fruitful friendship. And beautiful illustrations by our good friend Virginia de la Lastra, who is just phenomenal. This was a work of love, and this is something that we're very happy to share with the Society, with all of you, to help you grow closer to our Lord through the Blessed Mother and safe in the arms of the Church. You may be able to purchase them after the conference. That is definitely part of the plans. You got to come to the conference to get one of the initial ones. As you can see here, we got the tote bag. That's going to be a giveaway at the conference as well, along with the Scriptural Rosary. They will be available to purchase after the conference, Kat, so please don't worry. And then our vendor hall is going to be phenomenal. We've curated a very beautiful selection of Chestertonians. I wanted to put up the QR code for the conference just so you can see here. That's how you can register. You can scan that code. I'm telling you, we will probably have registrations going up later, but the hotel room deadline is next week. So before you get 4th of July partying, I would strongly recommend that you get your conference registration done out of the way so that you can join us at the end of July. Believe it or not, it's coming up in less than a month. It's going to be phenomenal. And make sure you join us for the breakout session. Nancy and I will both be there. It's going to be great. So it's like a family reunion. I don't get to see Nancy all the time. She lives in Illinois. I live in Baltimore. And so it's really nice for us to be able to come together as a family. And if you haven't been yet, you'll see. And then when you come back, it's going to be like a family reunion for you. So, so thank you so much for joining us. I hope you avail yourself of Nancy's book. Not only The Woman Who Was Chesterton, she has some great books written for children, the Chestertons and the Golden Key and others. Her newest book is Chesterton's Character. You can find that on the website that shall not be named. And she will also have copies available for purchase at the conference. So thank you so much, Nancy, for joining us. It's always good to talk to you. And everybody out there, thank you for joining us. And remember that Chesterton is better with friends.